You're joining Conversations with the Corporate Mystic, hosted by Stephanie Crain, a podcast for leaders and change makers navigating complexity in business and culture. Let's dive in. Today's conversation explores what it means to remain human in a world that seems to reward constant busyness, overextension, and performance. Because leadership today isn't just about getting results. It's about navigating uncertainty, change, and complexity without losing yourself in the process. I'm joined by Dr. Nika White, an international speaker, author, and founder of a management consulting firm dedicated to helping people and organizations maximize their potential. Recognized by Forbes as a top 10 D&I trailblazer, her work focuses on emotional regulation, resilience, storytelling, and belonging to help leaders build healthier, more sustainable cultures. Today, we're talking about burnout, emotional awareness, sustainable leadership, and why remaining human may be one of the most important leadership skills of all. Thank you, Dr. Nika White. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I've been looking forward to this conversation. I'm grateful that you so generously are willing to share your platform with me and your audience with me.
Thank you. And I know I am sharing you with my audience because this is a real gift. And I think this conversation is going to be really important for everybody who's listening. And I'm going to open with my signature opening question.
Okay.
So, and I think this one is it sounds like it's an easy question, but I feel like it's a lot deeper than most people give thought to. What does it
Okay. I'm
actually
ready.
take for leaders to remain fully human while they're navigating constant change, pressure, and disruption?
Ew. So we're going to jump right in. I see, but I love
All the
this.
way deep.
Yes, this is a really important conversation. So, Stephanie, I have come to understand through experience and working with so many different organizations, and even just thinking about my own lived experiences, that we often talk about adapting to change through strategy, right? Technology, skills. And don't get me wrong, all of those things matter. They matter tremendously. But what I've also come to believe is that our ability to remain human is what determines how well we navigate change. So, when I think about the challenge that we're faced with right now, it's not just simply that the world is changing. That's always going to happen, right? We're always going to be faced with disruption and different tension points that we're going to have to navigate. But it's that the pace of change is constantly activating our nervous systems, right? And
Yes.
leaders are being asked to make decisions faster, manage more uncertainty, and support others while often ignoring their own capacity. And
Yeah.
so to me, when I think about that, it becomes pretty jarring because, remaining human means that we need to be able to stay connected to ourselves while at the same time responding to what's happening around us. And that's where my passion, my interest, my training and learning all about emotional regulation has been really critical and quite honestly a leadership advantage that I have been sharing with many others. And so that's how I'm showing up to today's conversation.
I appreciate that. And, I'm so glad that you took a moment to define what we're talking about when we say remaining human, because it is really that connection with ourself and our sense of identity. And I resonate deeply, like also on that personal level of just that personal experience of holding space for your own integrity in a situation that is really, pushing and pulling at your value systems, which can be very, very challenging as a leader, right? When they are in these like sort of like almost sometimes it might feel like a no-win scenario. um, I also think something else that we need to really dig into is the amplification, the speed of change that's happening right now. I don't think that can be understated in terms of how much it's truly, literally triggering us. I mean, to your point of,
Yes.
just us, our nervous system. doesn't have time to just really take a breath, right? Like,
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that, modern leadership certainly requires us to lean into emotional regulation versus just being solely focused on output and performance. You kind of alluded to that just a moment ago. But, if we think about just the historical nature of leadership, it has, for the most part, been primarily assessed by output, right? And so, how quickly can we produce, right? How many goals can we hit? How quickly can we solve problems? And again, I don't want to state that those items aren't important considerations, but the problem with them is that if we focus there and there only, then that is performance without regulation, and that is not sustainable.
yeah,
And
that,
leader, as you mentioned, especially high functioning, high capacity leaders, which most leaders are, that's why they are a leader.
yeah,
They can appear successful on paper, but internally they could be operating from chronic stress, exhaustion, reactivity, and really just depleted. And so we owe it to ourselves to be able to also return to ourselves. And that requires emotional regulation because that's when we can access our best thinking, especially under pressure. And it helps to create space between that stimulus and response. And we often hear that there is a keen difference between responding right and
right.
reacting. And so,
Absolutely.
yeah, so I think it's just critical that we lean into this. So I'm so glad that you are opening up again your platform for this really important conversation.
You said something and it made me think, don't you think a lot of leaders m- think that they're emotionally regulated when really they're emotionally repressed?
Oh,
Because I
I
really
call it
get that
emotion
perspective.
dysregulation, and I think that you're
It
so
it is
right.
a dysregulation, but, they're so controlled and they don't see themselves as dysregulated, but
Yeah,
then, it's like they get more. I think those are the ones that get the most caught off guard when that unsustainability hits, because
that's so
there's a
true.
break point at some point, right? Where
Yeah, we're conditioned to show up a certain way. And so once you have adapted to that way of being, it is hard to even recognize when we are compromising, again, our full ability to optimize as leaders. The
yeah,
leaders who will thrive in the future aren't necessarily the ones who can do the most. Which is contrary to a lot of what we believe. They're the ones who can stay grounded enough to make those wise decisions when conditions are uncertain. And we need to be steady in our bodies. We need to have clarity of thought so we can be focused, especially when we're leading others and we're setting the tone for how they may be regulated and be able to remain calm throughout different types of disruption and tension points that are happening. And I often see that emotional regulation is becoming a leadership technology that we haven't fully defined in that way, but it
yeah,
influences communication, decision making, conflict management, trust building, culture, all of the things that really helps organizations to thrive and the people inside those organizations to be able to show up at their best. And so performance may get you results, but regulation is what helps you sustain them.
yeah. No, I think that it's such an important part, and I think some of those things that you named, there's it's interesting, like, if we look at how leadership styles have sort of, like, shifted and needed to change even over time, not just because they were right or wrong, but just because the world changes and you can't keep responding to new things in old ways. You're gonna get results that are not gonna really align, I think, and
The pure definition of insanity, right?
it is,
Yeah,
and we
yeah,
see
it
that
is.
happen. We see, that struggle of, and also, the struggle of holding on, is like holding on to a particular leadership style, or maybe even that we've created like this dysregulated cycle of leadership, where we've sort of, through conditioning handed down this dysregulation of emotions because it's been expected and rewarded, right? Like over and over again. But then we don't really get to hear the backstory of when the top performer actually like burns out, and we just get to hear the next top performer's story, right? We don't
Exactly,
I mean,
exactly.
I feel like that's
Yeah.
kind of So
Yeah. It's what the burnout culture is all about right now, and it's become so normalized in organizations. Burnout became normalized because exhaustion became associated with commitment. And therein lies the
there you
problem.
go.
Somewhere along the way, being overwhelmed became this badge of honor. It was what people were looking to do and how they wanted to be perceived because that is what was, rewarded oftentimes. And it
Like,
was
workaholic
celebrated.
wasn't a bad word. It was
Yeah,
really like
right, yes. So we celebrate the availability instead of the effectiveness, right? We praise people for pushing through instead of paying attention to their bodies and what pushing was costing them, right? And
right?
so it is something that I think many leaders have inherited, unfortunately. It's a workplace norm now, and that overextension is wearing us out. I mean, it really truly is. And
Well, and you just said what, overlooking what it's costing, but and earlier you brought up something, like, really clear, which is we've always, looked at business through measurable data. And what we're talking about is very sometimes intangible, but there's also a reality of not just what did it cost that individual for pushing through, but what could the organization have actually gained if that person was really functioning at their highest level instead of, like, being burned out and, like, because we can't measure the loss of what doesn't happen when somebody is, like, really truly producing at that level. And so I think it becomes even more intangible, but even more valuable at that point,
yeah.
and
Yeah. It's so counterproductive to believe that overextension is what's going to, reach the optimal output that we're seeking. Sustainable excellence really requires recovery, reflection, capacity management, and all of those things cannot. Someone can't really lean into all of those things unless they're part of a workplace culture environment that helps to encourage that, right? So the
yeah.
challenge now is recognizing that high performance and chronic depletion are not the same thing, right? So,
Yes.
I often say that many organizations accidentally confuse sacrifice with leadership, and that is
Yes.
hurting us. Yeah, it's creating this cycle that's making this the norm.
There is a lot of doublespeak. I recently published a short article titled "There's No Such Thing as Work-Life Balance," and I called it a gaslit statement. I'm like, work-life balance is literally the most gaslit statement in corporate America because it's just balance, okay, people? Like, it's just it's just life. It's just your life, and work is maybe a huge part of it. But the idea that, everyone, that statement, I think it creates a lot of internal guilt of, like, "Oh, balance has to be 50-50, right? Or balance is always equal," and it's not. I use the
It's
example of
not.
the stones that are like, the Zen stones that are all different shapes and sizes, and any one could shift and throw off the whole balance, right? And
Absolutely.
but we look at people like they're just this, like, rigid pyramid structure, and that's just not how we function, as
I totally
humans. We
agree.
we need that flexibility.
I don't believe in work life balance either. So we definitely share sentiments around that. I do believe in work life blend. I think that anything worth having in life, oftentimes in a season or two, may find that it requires more of us than what we want to try to give, you know. On a regular basis. And we have to be just cognizant about that and make those decisions. But I think that the difference is we want to have the agency of choice about how in which we balance or blend versus
Yeah,
having, the circumstances to force us without that agency of choice. And that's what we're seeing right
absolutely.
now is that
I
people are
love
being
the work-life
forced.
blend. I love that word,
Yeah.
and it
Yeah.
makes a lot more sense in the context of what it's really all about,
Yeah,
because it
absolutely.
it isn't just so compartmentalized like
Not.
they like we've been conditioned to believe. We've
Yeah.
been like, "You leave
Yeah.
this at home," and I mean, obviously, there've been TV shows made about it. Okay, so obviously it's like a real thing, but that doesn't it to your whole fundamental point, it isn't a sustainable way of even living,
No.
much less working or
And I think
functioning.
it starts, Stephanie, with us being very clear and honest with ourselves about defining the differences between busyness, productivity, and presence.
Yeah.
because they each, they're each interconnected, but they have very distinctions that I think
What are
sometimes
your
we don't
distinctions?
identify enough.
Tell me those.
Well,
Like,
busyness is an activity, right? And activity does not always lead to impact. We can be busy all the time, but busy doing what? Is it really getting us to some type of desirable end, right?
mhm,
And then productivity, it is just meaningful progress, right? Doesn't mean that it's complete necessarily or it's done right in that moment, but we're making meaningful progress. And I think that
okay.
the mindset around meaningful progress can help our psyche as well when we're finding ourselves potentially in this dysregulated state. And then presence to me is all about the ability to fully engage with what's right in front of us. So I can, certainly have a lot of balls in the air that I'm juggling at any given time, any given season. But where I plant myself in that precise moment is where my presence should be. That is what an emotionally regulated person looks like. We're not trying to become superhuman and just be in all places doing all things and doing all things well, because we're going to find that things are going to be compromised, and most often the thing that's compromised is ourselves, right? Our internal health,
Literally,
our
I'm
internal
sorry,
ability
Nika,
to
could
be
you hold on?
steady.
I got a text that I need to respond to really. I'm teasing. This is the whole point of what we're doing to ourselves. And it is out of integrity, right? For me as a podcast host to not be present in your conversation and act like, I mean, I don't have a text, but it's
Yeah.
the whole point of what we're doing constantly of pulling ourselves
Yeah,
out of presence because we're allowing ourselves to be drawn by literally whatever the next distracted thing is that's pulling our
absolutely.
attention.
And,
And
and I'll take it even a step further, and I'll say that, while productivity is, meaningful progress, but we also have to make sure that while we are engaged in meaningful progress and productivity, that we are also allowing ourselves to be present, because that's what makes it meaningful, right? Because, productivity without presence, it still can leave people, our bodies feeling disconnected from ourselves, right? And our
yes,
teams and purpose. But presence is what allows us as leaders, particularly, to listen deeply, to
I think
recognize all of the emerging issues and build trust. And sometimes, from my experience, the most effective leader in the room is not the busiest person, it's the person the closest attention. They're most present, right?
that is super true, and I
Yeah.
wanna what you said even deeper, that the busyness, if that busyness in and of itself isn't truly driving productivity, there is going to be kind of a loss of spirit there, right, on some
Yes.
level, and also, I would challenge if you're just being busy a lot without the productivity, you might possibly be avoiding something else or not dealing that busyness is like taking the place of something else in your life
Yes.
and might be a
Sometimes it's an
deflection.
escape. That is so good. That is so good. Sometimes it's an escape from reality, just to keep ourselves busy, just doing some type of activity. Even in spite of us being able to clearly articulate what the value is of that activity. I say all the time that busyness fills calendars. Presence transforms conversations, right? And then when you put that presence with that productivity, not only are we transforming conversations, but then through those conversations, we're transforming people and environments. And that is where I think the difference is really impactful. So,
So,
yeah.
how do we teach people, I think, to first be present with themselves? Because in order to really be in full presence in any environment, you have to be present with
Yeah.
yourself, right? I mean, or am I
Yeah.
maybe I'm making an assumption, but I feel like it's pretty important for
Yeah.
leaders to have that relationship to self in order to
I
really be able to
agree.
extend it outwards.
Yeah, and that's where the most important leadership is self leadership, right? We often think about leadership as managing and leading and influencing others, and certainly that's a tremendous part of it. But we cannot forget about the importance of that self leadership, right? And I think that leaders struggle to remain human, especially during times of constant disruption, like we're experiencing now with a lot of the uncertainty, right? But when uncertainty increases, many leaders will just automatically, they're conditioned to move into this over functioning and they try
Mm,
to control everything. They become control obsessors, right? They want to
yeah.
solve everything. They want to carry everything. And the bottom line is that not everything is ours to carry, right? But we will put that responsibility on ourselves. And then it makes us even more exhausted and even more, dysregulated. And so, I think that when others become reactive or emotionally disconnected from themselves because they're operating from depletion, that's when we find that we need to dig deeper into why am I losing myself and what do I need to change about my habits? And that's where I think a lot of the practices around emotional regulation can really help get us back to that centered, grounded, steady place. Yeah.
Let's just I think state something that's really important right in this particular moment because we're having a conversation and we're talking about leaders and we're talking about how they show up and the influence they have on people. But really what we're talking about applies to all of us and how we show up in the spaces we're in and our capacity to lead ourselves, to feel empowered versus feeling defeated, to do, and so even to that degree, like even if you're not the person at the top and in charge, what Dr. White is speaking about is critical to like everybody in corporate spaces, honestly, to be really turning these concepts inward and teaching, self-connecting, making sure that you're maintaining your own integrity and humanity in these spaces.
I think pacing, is also something that we need to lean more into as well because we tend to live in an environment where there's only one timeline and one timeline only, and that is urgency, right? Everything is always
Mm,
urgent. And it is difficult for us to be regulated when the environments we constantly find ourselves in signals urgency all the time, right? No matter
yes,
what it is, all the time. And so, part of remaining human means that we also have to be accustomed to resisting the temptation to abandoning our own needs and emotions and values in the pursuit of outcomes. And oftentimes that means we need to pace ourselves and stop operating on timeline urgent.
that's,
you know?
it is the truth. If everything's urgent, really, your truth, nothing really is, right? Because at
Yes,
some point,
absolutely.
you have to choose prioritization. You have to say, like,
Yes.
this is actually the most urgent. Right? Or maybe, even just getting something, maybe you don't choose the most urgent, you choose the thing that you could complete the fastest. So you can get some sense of like confidence and accomplishment and be
Yeah.
like, okay,
A momentum
that's
attraction.
good.
Okay, well, I got 3 things off of my long to-do list, and so I'm making some progress. Let me just keep going, right? And then we overfunction
It is
while remaining disconnected from ourselves, and so, yeah.
well, and in that sense though, like if you sometimes what we think is the most urgent really might need more space. And we're
Yes,
diving into it, acting like it, is a heart attack when really it's not. Really,
right.
it's more like anxiety, and it
Yeah.
just needs to calm down a little. And
Yes.
so
Yes. Yes, it
we're
needs to
sort of like
calm down
treating it
a
the wrong
lot
way.
oftentimes, yeah, and that's where self-awareness and discernment can really shape, healthier workplace culture, especially those that
Yes,
find that urgency is something that everyone kind of operates under from a timeline perspective, and so every culture is influenced by the emotional habits of its leaders, which is why I think it's so important for us to impress upon leaders first and foremost these really important practices that we are talking about today because they're setting the tone. They're emulating for others, right? And so if they have that
absolutely.
strong sense of self awareness, it's going to help them to understand what they're carrying into a room that others are then picking up off of them. And keep in mind that part of being able to have regulated spaces is when regulated people co regulate with others who are not
Yes.
regulated. And then we're able to connect at a level that, creates greater steadiness. So discernment, I think, is something that's really important too, because it helps us to understand truly what requires action and what requires just sitting still and patience and reflecting and thinking and listening and being present, right?
I fully agree, and I think, it seems like we don't think of it as, like, naturally, if co-regulation amplifies co-regulation, then certainly co-dysregulation would do the same. It would amplify
Yes, yes,
co-dysregulation,
yes.
right?
What
And
happens is we unintentionally spread that anxiety, that frustration, and that urgency. So, yeah, that self
one
awareness
thing
is
that
so
I've
key.
found, and I've experienced this with multiple leaders where, you talk about this humanity, it's like you'll ask them, "What's your leadership style? How do you work with your staff?" Things like that, and they're very much like, I give my staff freedom and I let them make choices and I give them time off and da, da, da. And then you ask them, okay, well, how much do you take time off? What does your calendar look like? How do you show up? And they're like, oh, I never take time off. I work 70 hours a week. I'm double booked every single day. And I will always say back to them, what you are doing has way more like influence on your staff than what you are saying. So it does not matter if you say, no, I want you to take time off and take care of yourself. If
You're not
you
doing
aren't
it.
doing
Yep.
that, they won't do it either.
That
Period.
is so
Like
true. That
leaders
is so
don't get
true.
that. You
Yeah.
can't say you want your culture to be a certain way and not model that behavior.
Yeah, I do some short and long form writing quite often, and particularly through my Substack, I have this column that's called "The Human Shift." And one of the articles I wrote about over the past couple months was titled something along the lines of "Culture is what people carry home." And the point that I was making in that article is that um, whatever type of culture and environment that people are used to when they are working. And again, we spend a lot of time in those work environments,
Yes,
right?
we do.
We carry that home with us. And so it's not only to the detriment of the organization, but it's also to the detriment of the people that we care for the most in our personal lives, right? Our partners, our children, I mean, so many different things. And so if
Absolutely.
we are taking a lot of those tendencies and habits that are being kind of emulated and modeled by leaders, to your point, and we're taking that and then letting it infiltrate our personal kind of home space, and it is just continuing this cycle that now it's not just isolated to my work environment. It really is carrying with me, into my home and personal spaces. And so I think that healthy cultures emerge when leaders understand their own triggers, how they are showing up, what they're modeling, and they're able to regulate their own responses, and then create space for thoughtful decision making because they are not just encouraging it through words, but they are demonstrating it, right? Culture
Yes.
is not built through policies only and value statements. It is built through repeated interactions that sticks with people. And we have to make sure that we're exercising those muscles to do the things ourselves that we're encouraging others to do. People pay attention to that.
It's so important and it is exactly on point, and I do get The Human Shift and read it, and I recommend that y'all go check it out too. It's always informative and insightful,
Thank you.
and, it's I think that you mentioned HR cultures aren't policy and they can protect. That's sort of what they're in place for. They're there to sort of protect. They're not there to build. They're not there to manage. They're not there. They serve a very specific purpose,
Yep.
and that's fine. But to confuse sort of what HR policy looks like with what organic culture actually is, and leadership definitely drives. Is my motto that I've used for many years. Leadership drives culture. Culture drives brand, and that
Yes.
is the experience. And, more and more with the way that we have transparency, this need for authenticity, this not just need for it, but demand at this point. I think that there's
Yeah.
a real public demand for authenticity, to want to know with clarity, like literally who you are, what do you stand for, what are you about? Are you AI? Are you, like all these things,
Yes.
it's like it really matters. And so I think that, leadership at one time could sort of hide behind that a little bit more, and now they can't. And just that expectation is there, and they are being asked to step up, and organizations are seeing they're recognizing that there's a gap. There's a real gap, and it is unsustainable. Uh,
Yeah, no, absolutely. Something else I'm finding to be part of the problem of this big challenge that we're talking about today is that I think many people will hear language like emotional regulation, and it may create this confusion about what does that actually look like in practice, right?
yeah,
And I think it's important just to share that it is not at all about suppressing emotions. That's not what we're talking about when we say, we need to learn how to become emotionally regulated. But it
yeah,
means we are recognizing what we're feeling, what and understanding what's driving those feelings, knowing our triggers, right? And we're
right.
choosing our response. Again, agency of choice very intentionally rather than reacting automatically. That causes us to pause, to take notice of what's happening in our body, what sensations are now being activated because our nervous system is activated.
Yes,
And it is something that can be learned, right?
absolutely.
I've learned it. I've been on this journey for quite some time now because I knew that I was dysregulated. So I say to folks that I am in community with and that I coach and I have the chance to facilitate sessions for, that I teach this and I coach this because I need this. I am you, you are me. None of us are immune to this, right? Especially if we are not conditioning ourselves to pay attention to what's happening within our bodies. And so it isn't a personality trait. Emotional regulation is a skill, and it's a skill that we can upskill ourselves in, just like any leadership skill. It
It
can be
very
strengthened.
simply in the corporate space, it's a skill that got devalued, and
It
now we're
is, because
seeing the
it's seen
cost
as
of it.
kind of a soft skill, but I call them
Yeah,
power skills. Soft skills are no longer soft. They are so tough. They are so powerful and impactful, and it makes all the difference in the world. And so, and just like any other leadership skill, emotional regulation certainly can be strengthened through awareness, practice, and repetition. And so I am definitely in this movement of helping people to recognize the importance of it. Yeah.
it's you know what, and it's so, as we stated at the beginning, and I think this is where we're gonna, like, land at the end, like, it's just so important. I like to do some audience takeaways, like, kind of what's really important for you to leave the audience with, or what popped out in this conversation that you were sort of like, "Oh."
I don't mind going first. That way I can be listening very intently and very present with what you're going to share because I've been learning so much from you as well, and I value that. But if I think about kind of a closing thought or a key takeaway, I think it goes back to just, considering that the future of leadership isn't just about becoming more efficient, doing more output. It's about becoming more human. And that needs to be amplified, especially in this high wave of AI technology that is popping up every single day, right? In a world that rewards speed and complexity and constant, adaptation, the leaders who stand out will be the ones who can remain grounded, connected, and emotionally present. And so the last thing that I'll say is that because people don't just need direction during times of change, they need community. They need leaders who help them feel safe enough to navigate that change. And so that's what I would love to leave the audience with.
It's a beautiful stated a concept for the audience to hold on to, and it leads right into what resonated deeply with me, which was when you talked about what you're conditioning yourself with at work is what you are taking home to your
Yes.
family and your community.
Yeah.
And it's so, it had just the amount of influence that this has on our lives as a whole, and why it's so important for all of us to really, really try to prioritize, try to put some real urgency around this matter because it deserves urgency. It really, I mean, I think it really truly does. And we you brought it up. Everything can't be urgent, but boy, should we name the things that need to be.
Yes. And this is it.
So I like to ask audience reflection questions, and I've got two that I'm going to ask. So the first one is, what have you been calling productivity that might actually be overextension? And what would a more sustainable approach look like? So think about Dr. White talked a lot about the distinction between productivity and overextension, right? And what does it feel like? I just want to throw that in there too. Like, not just thinking about it, but feeling into it. When do you really feel productive,
Yeah.
right? Because that feels good. Real productivity, I think, feels good.
No, I
Like,
love that. We talk so much about to-do lists, but do we talk about to-be lists? How do we want to feel? What we want to
oh my God, that's
experience
our whole next show. Oh
physically.
my God, to be lit. I
Yes.
love that.
Those are such great reflective questions. Yes, I love
Y'all put
that.
that on parking lot to be list. Okay. Because that's like definitely, I'm loving that. Okay. Here's the second question. Okay. If people around you are taking their cues from how you lead, what are you teaching them about rest, resilience, and self care? And remember, y'all, it's what you're doing, not what you're
Yes.
saying.
Yes. So good. So, so good.
These are important questions. So, before we wrap the show, tell the audience how they can find you, anything you want them to know about you at all. Like the floor is yours.
Well, if I tell them where to find me, that's where they probably can learn all the things that they would like to know about me and my work. And so my website is simply nikawhite.com. And, that gives you a great insider knowledge to how we show up to the work that we care deeply about, the type of work that we do, the type of clientele that we service. I also do a lot of speaking engagements. And so I have a speaker website, which is nikawhitespeaks.com. And on both of those websites, you also can connect with me on all the social media platforms. And I will love to be in community with each of you who find this topic of, again, being human centered in our approach, getting back to our human nature, remaining human. And yeah, because I am always looking to learn with and from others. And I think this is a conversation that we need to continue to keep having.
I could not agree more. And I'll make sure that all of those details are also present in the show notes, y'all. So you can definitely find Dr. White. Nika, thank you so much for
Thank you.
joining me on my show and for such an awesome conversation. I really had a good time.
I appreciate you. Thank you so much, Stephanie.
All right, everyone. I'm going to sign off and say bye. Bye bye. See you next time. Thank you for being here and sharing this space with us today. If this conversation sparks something for you, don't let it stop there. Reflect on it, engage with it, and if it feels right, share it forward. You can follow, subscribe, or pass this along to someone who's looking for a different kind of leadership conversation. Conversations with the Corporate Mystic can be found on YouTube and can be heard anywhere that podcasts are played. Until next time, stay curious, stay human, and keep leading from within.